Okay. So let's discuss the Lover's card for our readings on Meditations on the Tarot. So we discussed a little bit 2 weeks ago, but we didn't go into detail. We could go into more detail of our impressions in this meeting. But let's start with, I guess, overall, like, big picture of this card. For me, it was a challenge. It definitely aligned with parts of what I'm going through right now on my spiritual journey. So it's been very interesting the past few weeks, just noticing my engagement with chastity and how there's a lot of, I guess, fear met with some of these concepts that have been manifesting in dreams and just different waking engagements or like waking encounters, I guess. But I mean, overall, while it was challenging, I did enjoy the view of love that Christianity has inherent in its system, and which I think should carry through to other systems. I mean, certainly I like that for my own on some level. But I did disagree, or not disagree, but had conflict with some of the material as it was presented. So yeah, I think that's my overall impression. But what did you two think?
Cody?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot in that chapter in particular that I could not get really behind. I think I already mentioned last time that, like, I just have a really hard time believing in a God in a lot of the ways that he does, and like the procession of angels and all that stuff. Like, I just haven't seen it. I don't know it. I don't know. Like, I feel like a lot of this card in particular really rests on this like pretty firm belief system that, like, I just don't have for my upbringing, my way of seeing things. On the other hand, I definitely, I totally, I get the idea of poverty, of poverty, obedience, chastity. Again, we're going back to that, but and chastity in particular in this card. But and I get how it works with this card with, and I've kind, excuse me, I've kind of I've kind of like maybe bent the ideas in this to kind of fit my way of seeing it, to where I don't really, it's kind of like coming at it without needing the belief in those things, but still getting something from the idea of chastity, like the idea of loving the neighbor as yourself, like, and the idea that means that you see the other as a subject, not an object, to see the other as you see yourself as a subject. And that's really, I think that's really important. And we'll get into some of this stuff, I think, in deeper ways. But I don't see it as like, I guess I see the other as being, or I see nature as being more God than like God as kind of like separate from nature. And that's something that I'm still kind of struggling with in a lot of his writing, is like there's this separateness, but then it's like there's like God created stuff, but then I guess I'm not fully understanding his metaphysics, because maybe I don't fully understand the Christian metaphysics. And I've been like listening to podcasts about this stuff recently too, and it still is, I mean, it's Christian metaphysics are all over the place. So, and especially like, yeah, the philosophy has been debated for a long time on this stuff, and the theology of it, and a lot of the Catholic stuff is pretty it's pretty control oriented, like oriented towards controlling people. So I don't really dig that. Um, where else am I on? But yeah, like ultimately, I of course I'm still really digging this chapter and digging this book.
Yeah, George, how was the chapter?
Yeah, I kind of loved it. Yeah, it surprised me when it started with a lover and the way that he broke down the card. What did you guys think of his analysis of the imagery of the card itself? Just purely what's on the card. Cody, can you remember what he said about it?
Yeah, like there's like one woman who's pointing to his heart and one who's like trying to take him by the shoulder or whatever.
Mhm.
So like the woman that's pointing to his heart kind of represents the chastity, whereas the other woman represents temptation. Temptation to like fornicate, I guess, and like, well, I mean, of course that's like a big part of the chapter is the exposition on what that woman means.
I
Later in the
thought it
chapter.
was the other way around. Maybe I didn't.
No,
the
it's
one
the
pointing at
woman
the heart.
pointing to his heart that represents like the chastity, because it's the heart. It's the heart center. That's what matters. It's not the other woman is like pulling him away to temptation,
Interesting.
to an unchaste
And chaste.
life.
Fornicator. And all those movies are making fun of all of those concepts. But yeah, it was interesting. I was quite surprised, and that's how he started. Certainly, when I looked at the card itself, right, the imagery, I did not see two women tempting him. I saw. I think I saw the image of the lover. Maybe it's just from such strong influence from the Rider-Waite deck. And although I wasn't quite sure who the third figure was, right? Adjudicator is somebody who's providing advice or something, but I certainly did not see the third figure as an alternative to the lover.
Mhm.
But
I mean,
what did you guys think of the solar imagery as well as the cherub?
yeah, to me, this looks like a wedding ordained by God. And like the angel coming down would be like a gift or like a divine spark, where like the person in the hat looks of authority just in their attire and in their facing of the couple. While the couple is like moving into the future, this is like guiding the way into that with like rays of God divining that. So, I mean, yeah, I did not get his imagery necessarily. I mean, I do I think he did describe the light of God in there. But I like the quote about this. It is a living unity. It is three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and the other three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and three make six, and six is two, and two is one. I mean, I like that with the equation of love and in the card, which I see more, that stands out to me more than, a tempter and a chaste and an unchaste lover.
The repetition of spirit, soul, and the body confused me in that sentence. Right? It's six. You would think that it's six different things as opposed to a repetition of two halves.
True, because it's two people reflecting. So each person has a spirit, soul, body. And
yeah, I was expecting something different in that formula when I read it. I had to read it several times just to make sure I did not misunderstand what he's saying, but I could never figure out what he meant by that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I had a hard time getting that too, I think.
Yeah, that was Huh? Did you mean to say three other qualities? Perhaps three shadowy qualities? But I don't know. It was really kind of a mystery to me. And a lot of this stuff, right? It does not come natural to me. The theology, the lore, the 1500 years of Christian theology as well, probably even longer. But you can see it's a very well-established system of thought that he is operating in reference to. And this system of thought has its own logic, has its own reasoning, right? Is reasoning based in faith, reasoning based in reasoning about faith. And that aspect of it, I highly, highly enjoyed. And even though I did not quite understand his analysis of the imagery, I understand the movement of the prose, at least the way that I'm seeing it, as he's continuing his exposition. Now just using the imagery is almost like a framework by which he explores the third idea in the series, which he's so poignantly pointed out, right? Which is chastity. And the sequencing of that and the sequencing of the card is pretty interesting. And so he's continuing his exposition. It's almost as if that he found the natural match of it within the card itself and then read the card with the continuation of the exposition as sort of the basis, as sort of the underlying organizing principles to continue his thought, his extended thought, right? This whole book is this one continuous extended meditation about Hermeticism in terms of Christianity. And it's so interesting to me how he is bringing it together, and it kind of holds together pretty well as well. All right, so Haley, I'm curious. You said that you had a lot of resistance to certain parts, or just didn't quite vibe.
Yeah, I mean, I have, we could go to the first paragraph, which is like a couple pages in. It's page 126 if you have this book. But in the middle, I have a question mark on the paragraph. Let me think. Let me see what this. Oh, yeah, I feel like, so in this, he was talking about India liberation being, he said there's two ways to free us from the illusion of yourself, me living, you shadow. One is to extinguish love of oneself and become shadow amongst shadows. And he equated this to, I mean, I think like Buddhist practices, right? Which I thought was a little bit not the full picture of those practices, and kind of was just jarring to like see it that way. I don't know. I mean, and this is maybe I have a question mark here, because like bringing it to you two would be a good, you know, what was your impressions on hearing that? I mean, when I did, it just felt like in a very simplified, like too reductionist of the ethos of what it is to be like selfless in a Buddhist practice, or in a practice that stems from India, whether it be a Vedic practice or whatnot. I mean, yeah, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, just being in those spaces. That's not what I experienced when I was in those spaces. You know, I felt more connection, and I tend to feel more connection when I go to those places and then come back to seeing other people. It makes me feel like there is more connection there, not a lack of, you know, a lack of something.
I mean, well, I would have to say that the comparison that he draws is a very traditional one between the East and the West and the approaches. In terms of connection and the feeling of connectedness or transcending yourself, right? I believe the language he is using denotes the methodology by which you reach certain conclusions. And in one, self-erasure, self-effacing of the self. You can see this in many of the Eastern traditional practices, essentially extreme ascetic practices. Essentially, you are erasing your identity to really, and you're recognizing that as well as in everyone who's walking around. Thus, such heavy emphasis on the concept of Maya, right? The concept of this illusory world in which nothing you see truly is what it is, and you can't really comprehend it either. And that you have these fixed ideas are not fixed. And when you begin to use the methods of subtracting these things from yourself, and Eastern methods, when compared to Western methods, are often called negative methods because it subtracts as opposed to add to get to in terms of practice, in terms of methodology, to achieve the kinds of states that they are prescribing, right? That they propose, hypothesize, and advocate as a solution to suffering, as a solution to disconnectedness, all of the usual things that you would do spiritual practices for. And so his analysis of the Western way is also very traditional, which is it's an additive practice. You build it and you build it, you build it, it's more and more and more until finally, right? The moreness unites, the light unites with light, or love unites with love. The principles themselves shine through, right? They underneath the organizing strings of ideas unites, and in the addition, in the growing of light, in the growing of love, you unite with everyone who is also composed of the same material. They're just two different methodologies by which you can approach the subject. And I don't really feel like it's a critique upon the methodology. I don't, nor a critique upon the actual religion themselves. I feel like it's more a commentary on the methodologies that are advocated to achieve the states that in the spiritual awakening that each system is advocating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that analysis kind of belies his ultimately, like, he wants you to empty yourself, like you got to empty yourself and actually and empty your hubris, like that's the whole thing with poverty
or
of the three vows,
or to correctly recognize yourself. I don't think it's really an emptying out, right? It's the correct recognition of the part of you that is right, as opposed to he talks a lot, he makes a lot of distinction, and this you can understand from Christian theology, a lot of things that are good and other things that are not good, right? Anything but good. So, it's like he's advocating a certain way of seeing what is right. So chastity, poverty, these things presupposes a state of being that's more real than what you experience on the day-to-day level. So the emptying out is actually emptying out of mistakes, right? It's kind of similar, like if you think about it in that way, in effect, in function, right? To the methodologies that are being practiced, but the way that you get there is different, right? Not really. If you look at the ascetic practices of, you being a monk, and like being a monk anywhere, it's kind of like more similar than dissimilar, right? It's a disavowing of the pleasures, the things of this life, to really access the spiritual realm, right? To really focus on the spiritual realm. That you can't really explain away, but he does make a generalization about the methodology. I do believe that there is a practical difference in the way of access. But I mean, in real practice, there are so many variations of there's mysticism in Christianity, there's mysticism in Eastern religions, right? They're, and they're not purely mystical either. Some of them are right-based. There are just as many variations of that, for even in Buddhism, just so many variations and so many different advocated types of practices, but in general, they kind of share a kind of a current that runs through all of them, even though through time they have developed many, many different methodologies that can be dissimilar to the source.
So would it be fair to say that he's saying that you can really maintain your sense of self and selfhood? You don't have to just like you don't have to necessarily erase that as these so-called Eastern practices do in order to kind of achieve the same goals.
Yeah.
In a sense. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. I definitely I would say that is probably at least philosophically more in alignment with the Western development, right, in general, as it is heavily influenced by Christianity and Western thought, which is very much a more individualistic sort of system. It's more based on the individual, because it's really about the individual's relationship with God, right? It's like yes, there's a prescribed way, but you all have to find your way to it, right? And there's also the choice of an individual to submit or not to submit. That choice is left to the individual, as opposed to in the East, it's much more, it doesn't really matter what you choose. Like, you can feel to choose wrong at any time and continue to choose wrongly. It doesn't matter. Your choice really is just the working out of the grand cosmos in an infinite time frame of, samsara and Maya and karma as well, the karmic wheel. Yeah, but there, given that we're all human, right? There's definitely some focus on the human condition, which is really at the root of all of it, all religions, all experiences. These are just generalizations that he's kind of submitting. And for the time that he's writing this book, I'm not. They're way less concerned about being politically correct about what they say about other religions. So I give him some room to make those kind of generalizations, because for his audience at the time, it would be something they wouldn't even think twice about.
Okay. I mean, maybe I'm experienced in some of the nuances there, and that's definitely not how I practice it, where I think I'm kind of in the middle of the road, where I'm refining, and I just feel like I'm more refining the aspects of myself, subtracting, refining, adding, subtracting, having that constant interplay when it comes to at least my elemental work. And what I would want to do would be that. So, I mean, that's very individualistic and probably more of it's not Western magic for sure, but it has elements of that subtraction where I don't feel like I need to do that all the time. So it feels like that middle, maybe, I don't know. I mean, that's just my assumption, I guess.
Yeah. What else? I'm just very curious as to both of your reading of this chapter, as I am the all the way south here in terms of my appreciation for the chapter. So I'd love to hear about your you guys's, the points that are really kind of quite sticky for you for this, either in assumption or in what he outright says, right? Because he says a lot in this chapter.
I mean, I put a big question mark on page 136. I think it's the big paragraph in the middle. I put a question mark over this whole section. I really liked the bit after it, but I think this is where he starts getting into what Cody was talking about in the hierarchies of the different entities of, the realms, I guess, or the hierarchies. And I think this is where he was talking about like institutional religion, or, I mean, he never said that, but like the church, I think, was where So now, in aspiring to knowledge and experience of the depth and height of the universal Christianity, i.e., Catholic and traditional, that is, of the church, Hermeticism borrows nothing and cannot borrow anything from the church, since it is nothing other and is unable to be anything other than an aspect of the church itself, namely an aspect of its dimension of depth and height. It is therefore flesh of its flesh and blood of its blood. It does not borrow from the church since it is a part of it. Is the invisible aspect in time. So that's where I think he gives, I mean, I could keep reading, but we all like read this. I think he's saying that Hermeticism is a part of, like, Christian Hermeticism is a part of the Christian church, but it's it's like a part of the hierarchy. And maybe this is where I made assumptions, but implying that it doesn't necessarily like fulfill all of the hierarchical orders, I guess, that are involved in the church. Yeah, I think I just met this with a lot of resistance and understanding how he broke this down when he talked about Christian Hermeticism being a part of the Christian church. Do you both have impressions on that, or?
Yeah, really curious as to what you think, Cody, on that subject.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I have a different book, so I don't have the same pages, but maybe I don't need to. I mean, what exactly? I don't really see like. I mean, I see like that he's drawing on this whole idea. It's the Platonic idea of, and I don't know like the Hermetic. I know the Platonic though, but the Platonic idea that there's like this kind of unfathomable God, and then like that radiates outward in forms, and the forms take shape in like the hierarchies of angels and whatnot. And that's the Christian. That's like the Judeo-Christian reading of Platonic ideas.
Yeah, so the Neoplatonist.
And that there's like there's no gap between God and this world. It's all like the radiance of these forms. So it's like this hierarchical procession, you know.
Well, and I really like what he said, what he quoted after that, like the breakdown of, because that makes sense in my brain, like the breakdown of the three hierarchies. But I don't see that being a part of the church. I mean, he's saying in the paragraph above it that Hermeticism only deals with the first hierarchy, which would be working with the angels, archangels, and principalities, which is true. That's mainly what I work with in my practice. You know, if we're talking, you know, magic, that's mainly what I work with. But I feel like the second and third hierarchy, including, you know, the second hierarchy, including powers, virtues, and dominions, third hierarchy, including thrones, cherubim, and seraphim, like, I think that's a part of like magical workings as well. Like, I don't think that's just church exclusive. And I feel like those are more concepts than they are actually like indoctrinated in the church. Do you both?
I don't think he's saying that they're exclusive to the church. He's just saying they're in the church. They're like deeply embedded in and most people, and the thing is, most people don't know about it. Like most practicing Christians have very little clue about any of this stuff whatsoever. I mean, it's like, this is some deep theological stuff that goes way back. And it predates the church, like big time. I mean, defining these things, these forces, as angels, as powers, as cherubim, as seraphim, that's all like Jewish stuff, you know, which
right?
Predates Catholicism.
I know.
And even predates, and I think some of that might predate Plato, but I'm not sure. I think Plato, we don't know really. I don't think, but I'm pretty sure. I don't know how much of that is actually in the Old Testament, because I don't know. I don't really know the Old Testament, but I don't think a lot is. They talk about angels, but only like as like avatars that come down and hang out with the prophets and stuff. But So yeah, it's not exclusive to the church. It's just,
I mean,
and these
he's
are forces
saying,
of like,
though, he's saying it's exclusive to the church.
is
Like,
he?
yeah, I think. I mean, maybe
I
this is
don't think so.
okay, because I'm like,
Or he's saying that the
hang
church,
up on the wording of some things sometimes.
I think he's saying there's like this universal church that it is like infinite. That's like,
Yeah.
that
There's
predates everything.
Oh,
This whole idea, this idea that it's like, so yeah, it is in the church as
I mean,
the
Catholic and
primordial, like,
traditional, that is
yeah.
of the church. Like when you say, i.e., Catholic and traditional, that is of the church. Like, and then you talk about how like Luther and like other people that were involved in like churches, have differing ideologies or only part of the equation. Like, yes, that's like going into like philosophy of it, but I just feel like it feels a little um exclusionary or like reductionist.
Well, I mean, he obviously is Catholic, right?
Yeah,
So,
biased towards.
so well, there is some bias here, but what he is saying is that the Catholic Church, at least in my reading of it, is an operative of the metaphysical church, the church that has no location, the church that is carried by the Christian. So, and this church, within this church are these dimensions that are included, and that as a Catholic, he recognizes that these are aspects of the Catholic religion, but the church itself includes all of this. And he also, later on, right, he makes distinction between the different approaches. He also criticized Protestantism in a similar way, right, by saying they focus on one aspect of the three, and therefore it's incomplete, or as opposed to using the word church and then really confabulating the church with Catholicism. He's saying Catholicism includes all the dimensions that the metaphysical church really contains, and these are traditional to the Catholic practice. Catholicism practices, saying nothing about Catholicism as a practice, but it is saying that it contains these elements, well, some of which are things like Hermeticism, which is entirely absent from Protestantism. Like this dimension of it is implying is absent.
Really? Okay, so you don't get Protestant hermeticists when you're talking about Christian hermetics.
No, I certainly don't.
I don't think so too
That's
much.
so interesting.
Yeah, because there
Maybe in
would
some
be
places.
there is I mean, of course, there are as many Protestant types of churches,
Yeah.
right? They're your high traditional churches versus your newfangled, like, speaking in tongue and, go play with the snakes kind of churches. But the Protestantism is a reaction, right, to Catholicism, but it's a reaction to the form, to the actual organization, the human institution of the church, which has a long tradition of saying that there is a representative of God in the human realm, and it's a title, right, that is passed on from person to person, but this role people fill in, right?
Yeah.
This is something that they're reacting to, but when they establish their own methods, right, things are lost, things are not carried on, and it depends on which. It depends on which, aspect and how far removed, like your Lutherans, or they would contain way more of this similarities with
Yeah.
what came above. But increasingly, Protestantism became more and more reductionist in the way that they approached their religion and their personal beliefs and the prescribed beliefs, right? It's
That
personal,
absolutely makes sense.
right? It's speaking to the common man, and all you have to have, right? And depending on the version of Protestantism, is this belief, this faith in Jesus Christ. At least that's, once again, this is the average, right? There you can find any example of some variant that is not true, and many of these traditional, because they're kept closely within the actual clergy, within the actual archdiocese and the traditional the traditional structure that these things are not carried through fully into the subsequent reactionary churches.
Okay.
Or evolutionary churches. He makes a reference to this directly. I can't find the actual page where he talks about the Protestants and their reaction towards
Yeah,
and their
I'll
approach.
look
Right?
for it because I highlighted some parts of it, but
Yeah.
this is good.
But-
Thank you for that.
I also feel like it's good time to mention, like in his discussion of egregores, how like what humans kind of come up with versus what's real, what's like what
Right,
really comes
spiritual,
down
right?
from what comes down from above, and how incredibly difficult it is to distinguish those things. So I think he's also like getting to that, he's getting us to that point here of like, okay, so like these is kind of, in his view, like this is the spiritual aspect of the church that is carried down, that is real, that's
Mhm.
not just being created by power hungry humans to to occlude us from from seeing the real divinity. And I think he's making some good points there. And like, but it ultimately does come down to like us needing to do the work to actually see through the clouds. And that's exactly what he talks about in that agriculture part, is like us needing to actually do the work, that it's not just like an element of just faith. And that is a contrast to some of this. Again, it's like contrast to some of the Protestant things where it is just an element. All you need to do is believe in Jesus, and that's
Well,
it.
and
That's
again,
all you
that's
need.
what I mean. That was a major click, like light bulb in my head, because I do think a lot of the things that I'm struggling with is because I'm viewing this with the lens of a Protestant, like Christian. Like I was raised in a non-denominational church up until 14, and then in a Lutheran church up until 18, you know? So that's definitely like the foundation is like non-denominational. Like I don't know a lot about Catholicism, and maybe that makes sense as to why like the hierarchies really aren't something that I'm familiar with, because you don't see any of that within like Protestant churches. Like anyone can go on stage as long as you're a good speaker, you know? So, and like have some good interpretation of the Bible, which is a skill, and takes a lot of devotion and love, you know, for your community. But there's a lot of like things there that I think do get missed over when it talks, or, you know, glossed over when it talks about the actual like, yeah, work and the like maintaining of structures or maintaining of your mental psyche. Like some things are just brushed to faith, and a lot of things are excused and whatever when, yeah. I can.
Yeah, in some ways, the Protestant church is, you know, as the majority of the Protestant church as they exist today, lost its connections in many of the traditional aspects of religion. And I'm talking about religion starting with polytheism and animism before, right? Many of these practices were mutated, but highly preserved within the more ceremonial churches, the more high churches. Like Lutheran is, it's about as close as you can get to Catholicism without all the structure. But you know, you don't have like the Vatican archives, right? Storing thousands of years of stuff that they've hidden away, and stuff that, you know, secret documents and secret doctrines. And, you know, even as somebody who's not even Christian, right, I've heard of the kinds of the different types of people that and the different types of ideology that they would encourage, the different levels of people in their understanding of religion, and they would train them differently, so that your most questioning, your most doubting kind of people, they would encourage you to become the archbishops, right? Because they will then teach you some of the secret stuff that you don't actually get as the common practitioner of Catholicism, because you simply don't need to know. You simply need to be on the receiving end, right? Because there are mediators for the experience for the common man. So there only needs to be an actual priesthood that needs to have the secret knowledge, right, of what's actually going on, because there is this structure that filters down. Whereas opposed to if you flatten the structure, then you have to simplify the religion in many ways because everybody is an equal participant, right? And people are not going to get the more esoteric aspects of your religion without basically turning into a super religious, super serious, that's all you ever think about kind of cults. It's a heavy requirement for the common man to practice. So practically speaking, there are practical reasons why different churches have different approaches, right? Because they evolved that way. One is more like, hey, I'm this knowledge is flowing downstream. And the other one is, everybody gets this, so we must simplify the message so that we can all get on board, right? We can get on board with on the same ship, even because there's so many different variations of that. So as somebody who's not a Christian, by the way, I could be just talking out of my ass, but from an outsider perspective, I see that a lot, right? There's definitely differences in approach. There's even differences in knowledge level of things that are esoteric. Definitely the Catholic Church has preserved a huge and long tradition of esoteric practices. And many times, and I think this author even is the beneficiary of many of these, hey, we're going to teach you the Hermetic, like we're going to teach you magic within the Catholic tradition, right? And these people, his teachers are like bishops and stuff. So, like that's where it's practiced, right? You don't talk about it. There's no need to talk about it. We keep it inside of our group because other people, they just don't need to know any of this stuff for this religion to function for them.
Yeah, he even said that earlier in the book. Like, ultimately, it's like pretty simple. All you need is really simple religion, right? It's like it's actually a really simple thing of just connecting with, like, clearing the mind and connecting with, having the gnosis with God. It's like that all this other stuff is just like he's get into it because that's where he is, but like it's not I think he's already admitted that it's not necessary.
Well, I mean, let's look at it from this perspective, right? Like as somebody who's not a magician, right? You just mentioned to them, all you need is, gnosis, right? And then like think about yourself as someone who spends time to try to train yourself to arrive at the gnosis state, right? You can kind of get the kind of practical problems of trying to get people to just do that, because it's not easy. Certainly it's way harder now than it used to be, right? It's like kind of a, once you get there, right, it's easy to say all you have to do, like, yeah, but how long did it take you to get to a point where you can actually do that and not be convinced that you're actually talking to the devil, or you can't tell the difference, right?
And that's, I mentioned a story last Thursday of me shampooing somebody's head and them almost like blacking out in the chair and becoming so dizzy that he had to leave without his haircut. And so I'm learning to shut my mouth, but I was talking about how like my spiritual practice and what meditation means to me and how you can like, I've been reading some Psalms before I meditate. And that's like, because I'm doing another ritual before I meditate. So I'm basically expanding upon that ritual in my meditation. I didn't say all of that, but I was like, oh, Gnostic things. And I think I just blew his head up or something. And like, I felt so bad. Hopefully it wasn't just that, but like, he could not get dizzy. And it was like, we talked last Thursday there, you could tell there were things like in his subtle bodies that were like being adjusted as we were talking. And I didn't really understand what was going on. So I do think that's one of, the second example is my aunt, who's extremely spiritually gifted, but can see a lot of things as a threat because, while she's extremely powerful, like she can get, she overcomes whatever's at her way. But I think that there is not a strong, a knowledge of the different subtleties that are taught in the church, like she is taught and she says this over and over every time I talk to her about any type of esotericism. all I really need is Jesus's love. And I'm like, oh, of course. But like, but there's these things too. Like, do you realize your angels are outside of your door? Like, they look just like they're described like in the books that I read. And she's like, yeah, but you know, Jesus is just there. And I'm like, I know, but like, you know, there's more things. Like, I feel like a lot of these type of reactions are unnecessary because these things are so shielded, maybe. And then I wouldn't feel like, oh, am I going to be burned at the stake for like giving this man a shampoo and talking about my meditation practice? You know? Like, thank
That would
goodness
be pretty extreme. Like shampoo witchcraft, you know, like
you know,
that's hilarious.
and hopefully that wasn't it. And this is just like, you know, he goes to the doctor or something, but I mean, it felt like that was the case. So yeah, that's
Yeah. It would be quite something to be talking to someone and make them dizzy. That's incredible, actually. He's probably not that grounded. Yeah.
I mean, I hope it's for positive. Like, I'm also like, oh fuck, you know, I don't want to like touch people and have them, you know, freak, like be unadjusted or like not be able to take in the information.
It also might not have had anything to do with you too. So yeah,
Yeah.
you just don't know.
Thanks.
You just don't know. Just don't know. Anyway, he in this chapter, right, he talks about he talks about these concepts in the context of psychology, right? And the evolution of the different types of psychology, that in his analysis and their relationship to these layers, right, that he's talking about within the human and outside of the human. And you know, one being the reflection of the other. What were the words that he used? And
Ecstasy.
Ecstasy versus ecstasy, right? And you know, his critique of each of the psychologists basically rediscovering like some of the basics truth that has been evident in his opinion in the church, so to speak. So what did you guys think about that?
I mean, I really enjoy the definition and the, you know, I've never heard of ecstasy before. Ecstasy, i.e., the experience of the depths at the foundation within oneself. I think that's a really beautiful way to describe just like falling in love with yourself and, you know, taking the journey to healing.
For me personally,
Mhm.
ecstasy is nothing more than connecting with your true self. Period.
Yeah, which I mean, in my journey has been reconnecting to like has spurred a lot of healing, you know, reconnecting to my child self and allowing myself to know where my boundaries are and be safe and, you know, loved.
Do you think your child self is your true self? Do you equate the two?
I think it's a part of my true self. Like, I see myself in different, I mean, in my visions in the past or my guided meditations in the past, it's been a young woman and a young girl and an old woman. Yeah, maybe those are shadows of who, you know, my projection onto what I viewed myself in those states. And I mean, I've watched them evolve over time.
I guess my question to you specifically would be, do you feel like there is a self before this incarnation? Do you care?
I think there is a frequency that was maybe maintained through different space times. I mean, I think that you are uniquely here as you were uniquely there, but you can remember aspects of what it meant to be there. Maybe I'm making it too complicated, but partially true.
Yeah, just curious. Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, for me, right, there is the thing that is continuation. It's a theory. I don't know. I don't know for sure. But when I meditate, right, I connect with that. Like that's the for me, the goal of meditation is to align yourself with yourself. It's because what you call the self is not really the self, right? Like what's imposed on the physical body, everything that you have done to it, right, is a reflection of that thing plus some other factors, and some of them belongs to you, other things are mistakes you've made, other things are wrong beliefs, certain things are partial truths, and it all reflects, like for example, in the body, in your emotions, in the way that you carry yourself. And there's the thing that I'm connecting to that's beyond that, that is actually the real thing for me. So so every time I sit down to meditate, for me personally, my goal is explicitly to connect with the true self, to re-attune myself to that thing that is me, truly, and not all the influences and the devils and the demons and the cultural like influences and the karma and all of that stuff, but to dedicate some time to just be me, to remind myself, right, why I'm doing this again at this time, specifically in this way, so that I'm not drifting, so to speak. I have a because I'm aligned to myself, I spend some time there again to remind myself what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, right? That's why for me, meditation is so valuable, because it gives me a chance to just stop all of the other stuff and just listen, right? To align myself, to attune myself to the me that persists, the me that is constant, or constant in its variation, right? The thing that is invariant, the quality that does not, that you can put a thing on, that you can put a finger to, right?
Hmm.
But I think that really depends on your the way that you model the world, your beliefs about how things are, because all these things are, you can't really know that there is, that there is any objective reality to it, nor do I care, right? Like that second part took me a really long time to figure out. It's that yes, there's no way to verify it, but no, I do not care. Like it's like that. It doesn't matter if I can verify it or not, because it makes no difference to me personally, subjectively.
What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, I don't care. I don't know. I don't know. I'm agnostic. I don't know. Theories are fun, but I don't know. But I will answer your original question about what I thought about these chapters. I mean, about that section of like because it is like it's this kind of like progression of scientific knowledge that's like actually been really limited, and like the idea of like psychology was limited by these really strict materialistic scientific beliefs, and like Freud was limited, and then the next guy, and then Jung was like brought some depth, like to the flatness of kind of the material, like the pure cause and effect materialistic. And I think that's really cool, and I think that what we're speaking of is like brings depth to, I mean, what we're talking about is the depth that we can talk about, like, and like to not just see things as just like it's just this, it's more, it's like there's more to things. So it's like it's getting us out of habits of limited thinking, of and I think that's of absolute, like this is what it is kind of thinking, and getting into more of a bigger picture. And that's ultimately what I like about this whole book and this chapter, and that's what I see as the bigger. It's like in what he's talking about with like universal, or like the big love versus the, like sex, lust is just like one tiny aspect of the whole of what love can be. It's just like one expression, one tiny expression, and that's what, if we get caught up in that, that's when we're unchaste, right? That's basically what he's saying. But when we're like, when we see the bigger picture, when we can love our neighbor ourselves, that's when we're starting to see the glimpse of the bigger love, the chaste love. You know?
So let's continue. I highlighted, I'm going to read some of these verbatim, and we can kind of quickly comment on what you guys, perceive this as, because I'm curious. Here's the first one. Conscious breathing in the reality of grace is Christian Hatha Yoga. Christian Hatha Yoga is the vertical breathing of prayer and benediction. Or, in other words, one opens oneself to grace and one receives it.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of like, it's opening up to like something that is bigger than yourself, whatever it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be God necessarily, but it's bigger. It's like something that you're putting yourself open to, not just be like just grinding in this like linear, limited perspective.
Yeah.
You're like opening yourself up to like to be moved by a bigger love that will actually, that has your back. That I think that like the faith is that God or whatever it is has your back. And I think that's beautiful.
How do you resolve that with nature, though? Nature really doesn't have your back.
Nature has, I think nature has your back, has as your like conglomerate self, it does have your back. It's like, but it doesn't have your back as in like a limited sense of self, as like the identity of this body, as like identifying totally with this body as this thing that you want to hold and preserve. Sure, nature doesn't have your back, but I think nature, or the bigger nature, whatever it is, does have your back, does have the whole universe. Like it is what it is. It's not, there is no you to have its back up, like, or if there is a you, then that you is a more eternal thing that like doesn't really have any like, doesn't really matter if nature as like just the world in this like linear form has its your back. All I'm saying is like this limited sense of like self is, and like this limited sense of nature as this kind of like fight, like killer, kill or be killed kind of like.
Yeah.
When he says the dominion of the Antichrist,
evolutionary
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Of course, that doesn't have your back as a body that like can die, but it's like nature as in its unfallen state or whatever, or its virgin state is perfect.
Well,
and it's
yeah,
like, and you
fulfilling
can
and
live in grace in that state
it's
without
like
dying, without the fear of death, because there is no death. I mean, there is, because it's all just cycles. It all is just energy, can't be created or destroyed.
So I mean, I think I've asked you this before. So do you feel like all of this work is to return you to the animal self, like all of it, to return you to the unknowing, unaware experience of life? Would you say that's your goal?
I've actually asked that question about this myself numerous times during reading this
right?
chapter in particular. I don't like to think of it that way, because I don't think I think the animals suffer too. I think that animals are caught in, like, what we think of it as animals are caught in the same kind of samsaric loop, the same kind of limited perspective. So I think humans actually have some ability to see a bigger picture, and I think that is kind of like gives us that unique place to like experience something other than that. So yeah, I don't think that that's the case, because I think like, yeah, I actually kind of do, I like the Buddhist idea of, the realms, the Buddhist realms of like the animal realm, the idea that that is just another place in samsara, um, so yeah, no, I don't believe it's that. But I've wondered if that is actually a place of like, where that's, if that, I've wondered if that's a place where I actually would want to be.
Yeah, like, like, hey, since death is something we run away from, if I become unaware of death, right? I've never been aware of death as a thing that is coming later down in the train station, right? In the train ride, then potentially like I'm freed from many of the problems that I experience, right? The fear of death, the fear of pain, all of these things I am cognizant of that is causing me problems. And maybe some of these practices simply remove all of those, right? So, and because it's somebody who very strongly identifies with nature, right? I go outside, even sometimes just walk out my front door, and I'm surrounded by at least just some trees, and maybe sometimes even one tree or one plant. I get into that state where the I disappear, right? It's just sensory experience. It's just like things are going on, and there are these impressions and smells and experience, and but there's no like the day-to-day kind of things, just kind of, they're not there. I believe that's like the escape hatch that you're talking about, right? The loops that we're caught in, just it's like an escape key, right? Escape, and then you're like somewhere else, right? You're not experiencing those things that keeps you trapped, keeps you in place. So those things are keeping you from being productive, really, from being active, from just doing without thinking, right? From just being, just be. And I strongly identify with that in terms of nature, but I feel like nature is not the only way that I can do that. Although I strongly identify with nature.
Well, yeah, I agree. That's true. Yeah, and it's not the nature that's necessarily doing it. The nature helps, but it's just the state of mind, it's something in you. It's not the nature. It's not even yeah, it's not even necessarily faith in the nature as having.
I don't know. Sometimes I get the
something
feeling
wrong.
it's like the right machine for the right environment. Like like for me, like the machinery of me is in the right place when I'm there. Like it feels like this machine belongs in this place, and this place is nature. Like that's closer to what this thing, right? This organism is really, and it reminds me, right, that there's this aspect of myself that is very much that. It's like a thing that reacts and acts, and there's doesn't have to be this concept, this coalesced concept with itself. And in that there is escape. There's that escape key. There is the escape, something grander, something bigger, something not of you, right? Or at least your normal everyday conception of you as kind of being this thing that's kind of limited and all these selfish impulses and concepts, as opposed to I'm in here. I'm too busy to to really worry about all the like little bullshit things that keeps me spinning and occupied for no real reason. Like for me, that is a real thing. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're really just connecting with what is. I think you're, and I mean, it's like you are, and I think the reality is you are connected. I mean, there's always the element of connected because you're in the world. Like there is no not being in nature.
Yeah, it's an illusion.
Nature is
Right?
everything. It's just a state of mind that somehow gives us this sense of separation from it. That's like a disconnect.
Yeah.
And civilization tends to just like exacerbate that disconnect.
Well, and I think we're talking about the ideas of the Antichrist figure that he presents, right? Like that is the thing that removes you from like flows.
So his Antichrist would be like Elon Musk would be Antichrist.
Yeah.
Anybody who's a captain of any industry would be antichrist, right? Any scientist would be an antichrist.
There's
Basically,
I think-
anybody who's not seeking, who is operating in the objective would be antichrist almost immediately, based on pure definition of his definition, antichrist.
I think most Christians are antichrist.
Yeah,
by
I
his
totally
definition.
agree.
In this country, at least, like,
Yeah, this in this antichrist basically is a lack of that vertical dimension, right? That aspect of looking up. It's always looking forward or backward, or it's operating on this flat surface of the earth, and we're just concerned about what we see down here, but never really looking up, never really trying to seek that connection. Instead of everything evolving, everything is what do we call it? Complexity theory. It's like a behavior that arises out of organization, right? Self-organization. It has to do with Egregore. It has to do with emergent behavior.
Oh,
Yeah, that's it.
emergent.
Yeah, emergent properties. So AI would be the ultimate antichrist, right? Because it is literally the power, the
That's what I thought
product of
of.
our power to will, right?
My friend is coding ethics into AI at Google. So I'm like, oh my God, whoops. But-
Yeah.
I always wondered about that. Like all this machine learning, they're training these AIs on like just content of the internet and stuff, right? Like, but what if they trained it
Oh, this
on
is so gnarly.
connection with nature, like natural this stuff? I don't know. Like,
I mean, he loves
is that
nature.
impossible?
Like, he's the smartest person
George
I've
would know more. I don't know.
ever met. Like, but he's in nature most of the time. But it's not like just behavior. Like it's like he has a PhD in cognitive science and a PhD in computer science, and it's like lots of theory. Like he's paid to read books and like code,
Like ultimately, right? Like if you believe in what this person, right, this author is saying, that in order to make an AI not an antichrist, which by the way has nothing to do with ethics, in his opinion, right?
Yeah.
Because these things are properties of things that have connections up to the divine, and that ethics can be debated. In fact, you can have ethics that are entirely based on evolution, right? Based on group collective think. Right? These are the agreement. We agreed upon these things as ethics, because there are ethics that are like that, right? There's purely functional ethics. And like basically he is saying that like this whole antichrist thing is just cracking me up, right? That's really made to me. But it's an on point analysis, but it is so colored by this weighty like body of knowledge, right? It is like the of course conclusion, if you take it into this body of knowledge and its currents and where it's going and the way that he's reasoning it and peppering it. And of course, you will come to this conclusion, but it's funny that it is the word that he chooses to describe the Antichrist and his opinion of the Antichrist. And I tend to agree with his definition, by the way. Like it's like, oh, okay, if you reason in this way, of course, Antichrist has to be this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good logic. I like it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leaves very little to be argued with. What do you think? Anyway.
I mean, my initial thought goes to like how Cody's described, like it has a piece of nature in there that I think is unaccounted for. Like I don't have a fully fledged theory for this, but this might be, Cody, why there is a gap between like the hierarchical version of, of God that he presents and like nature in there, because I think there is like an equating the Antichrist to the serpent, I think is also like an unfair and analogy kind of like, again, it makes sense in how he's presenting it, but I do think there's different interpretations to the story that wouldn't have that. And maybe it's just the trigger word of it, and there's really no weight more morally, whether or not there's, I mean, I would argue that he is weighing it morally, but maybe I'm misreading that. But I would still not equate the serpent with the Antichrist figure, even in how he presents it here. And I think that's the crux of his argument. And he says to read another book to see how that guy equates the serpent to the Antichrist. And I feel like that's not what I've researched about like snake imagery or like what that story represented. And again, there's a lot of blame. Yeah. If there's a lot of like taking of the fruit, dropping of the garden, like this was shit, like we need to go back there. Like I don't know if that's fully what is being said, but that's definitely how I'm interpreting it. And that's not my like experience of like living in the world or the fall. Like I do feel like it's necessary. I think snake DNA needs to, or snake needs to be within us to understand and to maneuver through nature, through what has been presented and the things that are around us. Like these are all just adaptations to like living that I think is necessary to know where you direct yourself.
Yeah, Haley, I totally I totally agree with that. Like I was really I was just writing just before I came about that, like trying to puzzle it out for myself. And yeah, I don't like it either. And I don't like, he makes a statement about evolution having, like, it must have some definite aim, like, and like it's propelled by an intelligence that's imperfect, that's not of God, that must be the serpent. And I think and I think that's bullshit. Like I think that's not, I think he has a really poor understanding, and I think he's actually falling into one of his own traps there, of assuming some stuff that like that's not, he's actually assuming almost an egregore that's like, or he read this guy's book and he's like seeing that as some truth and I think the guy's book is actually an egregore that's like created by the guy. And I looked up the book, and he's an evolutionary biologist who's also like a Catholic, the author of that book. But he has some stuff wrong about evolution. In my view of evolution, there's not a definite aim, that it's like pretty random. And that it's like a bigger thing than that. Like, what's that?
Change is an aim. Like,
yeah.
But it's not like, I mean, the goal is change. Like, it doesn't need to be any further than that, I don't think, right?
Yeah.
That's my interpretation of it, but
and I think that is of God too. That's like, there is a unfallen aspect of nature in evolution and I think the serpent might represent, you could say the serpent represents kind of a limited understanding of that, of evolution, so that's why I'm saying that I think he's falling in his own trap of like falling into like kind of a flat limited understanding of something, because I think he's falling into that, because I think his understanding of evolution and its place in the hierarchies even is maybe flawed, but who knows?
I think it's his early writing too, and I do think that we have, I mean, isn't it right, this is pretty early in his, no, okay, never mind.
No, he wrote this when he was 67 years old, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
pretty old.
A moot point, but my second point was going to be like, we have more, I mean, we've read more, like the cosmic serpent is really where I get a lot of like understanding around like snake energy according to other traditions and within our DNA. And that book is really good, like, and very enlightening to like what that story meant to me and like my understanding of that. So I mean, we have maybe more like alternative writings on things like that with different cultures than maybe was presented in this time. Like I'm more equating that with like but I mean, I agree with you. I just think there's like not enough information there to make that like, but I guess I guess for a really long time, like, I guess people still think this, so never mind.
People still think what?
Maybe like Antichrist, serpent, like nature. I mean, I haven't heard that before though. Have either of you heard this ever before? Or?
So, no, I mean, I have a very different read
Oh, okay.
of that entire thing. So he makes a point about talking about symbolic language, right? Like in this chapter specifically, and that these stories are not to be taken literally, nor are the names, because they're in essence, if you look at it in that way, then symbolically speaking, they're placeholders. Serpent is X, right? You define X so that you can talk about it separate from Y. So serpent is a tendency of force, right? That cause some kind of fall. And it is the impetus for people to make the initial mistakes that led to all the subsequent mistakes that we're making. This is Christianity in the form that it comes to us in here in the far west. But I didn't read any of that, like nature, evolution. I get what he is saying about that. But for me, like the fall, right? For many people, the fall is where things went wrong. And personally speaking, for me, the fall is where the things must happen in the way they must happen, and that where the things actually are going right. If we are to believe that this is a evolutionary process of expansion and not infinite exploration within a closed space, which is pantheism, right? Everything is happening all everywhere, all at once, in all combination, but it's enclosed, right? It's enclosed in a space where this is happening. It is a closed system. And this is where, depending on the kind of branch of Christian belief, I guess, but once again, take it with a grain of salt, because I am not Christian. I don't come from that tradition. This is just my understanding that there is the school of thinking that we are the expansion of God. We are from God. We arise from that which we are becoming more of. So, which is to say, from a fixed quantity comes more, like comes growth, right? Something that grows from, and then if God cannot grow as a concept, omniscient, omnipotent, there's no growth. There's only existence, right? There's not even movement, because you can't move anywhere. So part of for me, when I read about these concepts in Christianity, they're essentially pointing at a possible scenario of growth of God, the making more of God becoming even more, right? It's unfathomable, but where it's going, maybe he cannot fathom either, right? There's a growth, there is a increasing of God. God is growing, evolving in a way that's mysterious, because we human cannot comprehend. And that's some of the same justifications that Christians have been using about you cannot really comprehend the logic of God truth, and therefore you cannot comprehend how great you can possibly be or how terrible you can possibly be, right? And so it's kind of presumptuous to be making statements about how you're wrong and you're right, because what you can't know, like your view is too limited. So for me, this whole chapter about critique of nature, right, is really one of Christian critique, somebody who comes from that background, with a very deep set belief that the fall is actually a negative event, which to me it's not.
Yeah.
To me, it's a neutral event. It's an event that leads to some eventualities, right? And we're playing through those eventualities and learning about what that entails, right? In our very limited way, playing our very limited part. But like what happens when we begin to make the spiritual machine, right? We create a AI that has an interface for experiencing the divine. Well, then the machinery is really then divorced from the spiritual, the vertical aspect of the cross, right? So to speak, according to this chapter. Then what of it, right? From will to power, we've arrived at, once again, the spiritual creature that is now more than before or different than before, right? And that is purely coming from, for example, evolutionary or human perspective, the collective human knowledge that we just happen to, quote, stumble upon that solution of making a spiritual machine. Then what, right? How then talk to me about the fall and all of this stuff that has happened ever since. So there is kind of this kind of pessimism that runs through the judgment of the event of the fall. And for me, that's kind of a very limited view of what has occurred, right? I mean, there's a narrative of free will, there's the narrative of choosing for yourself, but then there comes this narrative of always choosing wrong or choosing not according to a higher inspiration, right? But if you're always choosing to the higher inspiration, then doesn't that imply that things are not changing? And you're just an ever repetition of the same formula in which you can possibly choose wrong. And so the only choice is whether to live by that formula or not, right? All the struggles are relating to that formula. So where is the growth? Where is the, like, why keep doing it, right? Why not just eradicate the whole experiment? I mean, reunite with God. This is the age-old question that people have been asking, right?
Yeah.
Doomsday cult.
Yeah, second coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said, George. And I think I agree. I totally agree with you there. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And yeah, like the serpent then is a teacher of like,
Yeah.
or like the ability, it's like gives us the ability to kind of like navigate all these things, gives us like,
catalyst.
because if we don't know, because if we don't know kind of what, if we don't know what isn't God's will, then we don't know what is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in kind of symbolic terms.
And
like,
we know God's will, right? What about our own will, right? What
Yeah.
about the choices that we make to align to God's will? And what about the times where we choose not to align to God's will? Like having that will, right? It's both a curse and a responsibility all at once. It's a gift, right?
Yeah.
It's learning about that will. It's learning to align or not align. And I don't feel like we're aligning to something fixed. It's like it's got to be more than that. Like every ounce of instinct that I have says it's way more than something that is like this magnificent sameness or the magnificent alignment to something that already is, right? It's just just feels wrong. It feels untrue, right?
Yeah, that's exactly why I don't agree with him in saying the serpent isn't of God, because I think the serpent is of God,
right?
Necessarily,
it's an aspect of God,
yeah.
Right? The serpent it's a teacher, it's a taskmaster, it's cruel, right? But it's cruel and it's kind and it's all of those things, but it is something that helps us grow. We have to help. It's the agent of change, the agent of growth, right? Or destruction. They're aspects of the same thing, right? Destruction, change, growth. They're aspects of the same thing. Like they're just depends on when you look at it, right? Like which stage are you, like which aspect are you looking at?
See, this is where we get into like our own like formulations of Christian Tantra.
Definitely. Yeah.
And that's why I like magic, is because it takes you into that imagination. Like, how do you, how could you like understand the formula of change, growth, destruction, that is a formula, and like understanding where what that looks like in your life, and how you can transmute those energies to, like, shape that in some way that, I mean, your will decides. Like, that's the fun, that's like living life like HD, it's like a little bit more ups the ante, which I do think that he would disagree with, in some regard,
Yeah, for sure.
in a lot of regards probably, but that's like what gives me like joy and like a deeper connection to like what I would ascribe as God, like understanding that, yeah, that this is life.
And I don't
And
think,
that,
I wouldn't, I think he would say that that keeps you from possibly having gnosis, the state of gnosis, but I don't think so.
I don't think so. I feel like you have to have gnosis as who you are. The reason why we don't all do the same magic for the same reason, it's chastity, because we ourselves have to respect this agent, right, and our place in the fabric, and what is the right operation for you, right? What's the right goal of that operation? Even if we perform the same operation, your goal should be different than mine, like, because we are not the same people. And to not respect that, to remove your will from the equation, I believe is fornication.
Yeah.
It's literally not chastity. It's the opposite of chastity. And we really circled it all the way back now to the original, chastity being
Nice.
and I feel at a very deep level that this describes very well overall, right? Some aspects I don't, seems a little archaic. Other aspects seems very hierarchical, like it made sense at some point in the past. Maybe it makes way less sense now. But overall, the analysis kind of triggers those feelings within me, right? What is chastity for me, right? What is my relationship to what is right? What is your relationship to what is right? I would be very surprised if our, what we come up with is, I mean, they may be similar, but they can't be the same, right? And so therefore the operations that we perform cannot be the same. And that too, right, is part of that respecting of your understanding of who you are, and that continuous journey of really learning, respecting, acting from that place, and then continuously changing according to the serpent, right, as we continue to move through our lives. And I find that to be a beautiful, it could be horrible, right, for you experientially, but it's a beautiful way to look at progression and really defines your relationship with God. And that's what it is, right? God does not have one relationship with man. We have individual relationships because we're not the same. We're individual wills, right? With our own choices and our own understanding and our own feelings towards that relationship. To me, it just gives me that deeper appreciation for all those words that people throw around, where they just are offhandedly mentioning, talking about their religion. When I question a little bit deeper, all of these things are absent. They're just words. Like you get the feeling that they're parroting something that they have heard with no real connection to those words, right? Or with the connections that are very tenuous, that would not really hold up very well to just even a little bit of scrutiny. It is their journey. I respect that, but somebody like him, right, really puts it in a way where I'm more likely to accept what is being said. I'm more likely to accept the message behind the indoctrination.
Yeah.
So
This is, I think he's got a level of like tantric in him too. It's like, that's where like at first, like reading chastity, I was like, oh, chastity, that means like no sex, but like no, but like that's where we can have like truly like amazing, like metaphorically and real, we can have amazing sex, consensual sex with somebody, and still be chaste.
Yeah.
That's really, I think that's a really powerful idea, just that.
these words, right? Poverty, that sounds horrible, right?
Yeah.
But then like you're like, oh, okay. And then like by the end of the chapter, you're like, yeah, raw, poverty, right? It's the self-restriction for elevation, right? Like, and then like it's just so great the way that he's not really redefining these terms, but he's really adding some real like depth to these terms in a way that magicians will understand. Okay. That's a skill. Like we're very diverse, we're very different, we have a lot of different theories, and we don't even sometimes agree like on what we do. But man, to be able to speak to this audience and kind of like about a subject that generally the magicians don't quite are not very likely to have very good feelings about. Man, that's a skill. I have great respect for that. That's why I love this chapter, by the way, because chastity, really? And then like by the end of the chapter, I'm like, yeah, chastity. Hell yeah, chastity.
Yeah,
Woo,
chastity.
roots.
Great. Cool. Can I end with a quote? Any final kind of comments from the peanut gallery? Kidding.
Up to.
Up to. Okay, I'm gonna read page 127. Love once born as substance and intensity tends to spread, ramify, and diversify according to the forms of human relationships into which it enters. It is a cascading current which tends to fill and inundate all. I really like that.
Yeah, I only have one disagreement with that whole sentence. That's human relationships, right?
Oh, for sure.
If you read that as humans having a relationship with other humans, I definitely disagree. But if it's humans having relationships in general with any X at the other side of that, then yes, I can kind of get behind that.
Wait, I'm sorry. Repeat that last thing you said.
So if it's humans, love humans, and X being the object of that sentence, then yes,
Okay.
anything fitting into X.
Not just human, but
yeah, animal,
others.
spirit, other, himself.
Yeah,
It's not just on the human level. Then I can
absolutely.
get behind it.
Well, and like the old, and I mean, yeah, it's like the ultimate. I mean, yeah, I don't want to talk about the holy daemon is what that reminded me of. It's just like that really rang right then. So excited things for our future. I don't know.
I'm already reading the justice chapter.
Nice.
2 chapters ahead.
Oh, you
actually
are.
The next chapter, the chariot is really straightforward.
Okay, cool.
Found. So it's like it should be a pretty quick.
Thank goodness.
I thought it was really straightforward.
I've been struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, once we're here, it's fine. It's just, getting there. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like hangups, but
justice is not straightforward.
Really?
This book is like somebody, some random Joe picked up this book and we read a few. They were immediately like, they would get dizzy and walk out of the bookstore.
Walk out of their haircut.
Yeah, this is not a book for mortals. But not really.
Cool. We're glad.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever very popular at all.
And yet it's in every metaphysical bookstore, right?
Really?
Is it?
Well, it certainly wasn't mine. I had already started on Kindle, but I was just randomly walking through this store. I was like, oh, this looks pretty. Oh, wait, this is the book I'm reading. It was just on the shelf, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that looks kind of interesting. I picked it up.
Maybe it's recently gotten some press or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
someone commented on YouTube saying that they were, I mean, they haven't watched the video since, but the first video they were like, wow, I can't believe you're reading this. I'm excited to watch along or something. And I was like, oh my God, I got kind of freaked out. But he never
We're gonna have followers. Oh shit.
I know. I'm like, whoa. So hi, followers.
That's very cool. It's a super cool book. I'm so glad we're reading it, but it's a little heavy, it's a little dense, I feel like this is one of those books that will be kind of hard to keep people coming back week to week, because there's that density and there's that pressure of keeping up and reading, and you just get tired, like unless you're just a real nerd and reading, like I suspect Cody is.
Britannia had a shift tonight, but she read and she was there last time and wanted to be here. So she sends her her hellos, her regards. I'm gonna stop.
She's been great to have, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me stop this.
What did you